won't cloak my soul. I see her silhouette still. Do I wish for her to return again? Do I wish for her to stay away? Close my eyes. I need to see fake light slowly take shape. Won't make moves to cleanly forget my yesterdays. I'll take stars above darkness, won't cloak my soul. Close my eyes.
Woke up this morning with the sunrise in my eyes. Just like a new day, a breath of fresh air in my life. I don't know how, don't know why, but I'll be toasting all my life. My boots and briefcase are waiting at the door. My ride sweeter to meet the one I love.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. May I encourage you all to begin to take your seats so that we may begin. Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad the spirit of networking is alive and well. Can I encourage you all to take your seats, please? There is a bit of a primary school teacher in me somewhere, so it always kicks in at moments like this. Thank you all for coming. My name is Eliza Anyangwe. I am your facilitator, your moderator for this session. I know we're moving towards circular economy, collaboration, not competition, but having been socialized in a system of competition, I get really anxious about who will come to our session. Will it be empty? And actually, such a brilliant turnout. So thank you all for making the right choice, obviously. You are in for a treat, and hopefully you'll be challenged by the things that you hear. I'm not going to give you an introduction into the circular economy. You should be well versed on that by now. There have been lots of sessions. The point of this session is to look at the question specifically from an Africa standpoint. So we're very delighted to our hosts, both from the Finnish government and to Citra, for making this session possible. I have long reported on international development issues and environment for The Guardian and CNN and various people, and the question of how does Africa leapfrog in terms of its economic model so that we're not making the same mistakes that we see the West has made? How do we facilitate that given the context of power imbalances? Let's be real about that. So hopefully our speakers will speak to all these issues. But first, for your participation, it is just worthwhile for me to go through a little housekeeping with you. So a show of hands for who has the app. So well behaved. Okay, very good, very good. So in the app, you will see that there is a little prompt or a little box for the message wall. The message wall is how we are going to be taking questions for this session, okay? So if you have that ready, please use it. It is introvert friendly. So those people who never ask questions because they can't speak up, this is for you, okay? Please click on the message wall, type up your message. Do make it brief because I will be reading through it and then I will be your mouthpiece to the speakers at the appropriate time. So have the message wall open, put your name in so that I may include it, and your question. If for whatever reason the technology fails us, we have 2 roaming mics, so do not worry, we will still include interventions from the floor. Okay, so just by way of further introduction, it has been really interesting to hear at the opening session talk of fair transition, investment, and governance. We will hear these reflected from an Africa standpoint with a couple of opening remarks. The first will be from Dr. Vincent Biruta, who is the Rwanda Environment Minister. Following him will be Dr. Anthony Nyong, who is the Director for Climate Change and Green Growth at the Africa Development Bank. That will be really an overview perspective, a bird's eye perspective, and then Anthony will join us at the stage, and all our very distinguished speakers, and we have done a very good job to try and crisscross the continent because we know Africa isn't a country, will be here to speak to all their different perspectives. Okay, I will introduce all of those at the right time, but suffice to say, welcome, karibu. I went to boarding school in Kenya, so that's all I've got, sorry. Bienvenue, maybe, I can't say it in Finnish. Please welcome up our first speaker, Dr. Vincent Biruta.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you today for the World Circular Economy Forum and this session focused on Africa. I would like to extend my thanks to the forum organizers and the Finnish government for their commitment to sustainable development and green growth. The forum, and this session in particular, are an opportunity to share both Africa's experience in fostering the circular economy and the many opportunities that exist for investment in green growth. I'm grateful for the chance to share some of Rwanda's experience and look forward to our discussions today. Rwanda's commitment to the circular economy and green growth comes from a belief in fostering socio-economic transformation while also conserving and protecting our natural environment. While the term circular economy might be relatively new, the practice of utilizing resources to their full potential, creating long-lasting products, fixing and sharing goods out of necessity, and recycling has been common practice across the continent for generations. In fact, Africa is already a circular economy leader. In Rwanda, as is true across much of the continent, the principles of the circular economy have been applied in a range of sectors, even without coordinated assistance or facilitation. Some innovative examples of the circular economy in Rwanda include recycling of wastewater by car garages, the treatment and use of water by food and beverage companies, the making of fashion accessories from discarded materials, and the adoption of the sharing economy for wedding and other ceremonies attire. More formal and larger scale examples include a state-of-the-art e-waste dismantling and recycling facility and the introduction of a ride-hailing app by Volkswagen to reduce personal ownership of polluting vehicles and encourage the sharing economy in Kigali. To establish the e-waste facility, our national Rwanda Green Fund invested close to $1.5 million to build the facility and develop the relevant legal framework for it to operate. The facility can process more than 10,000 tons per year and will employ 1,000 people in collection and processing across the country. The facility also refurbishes computers which are given to schools, while plastic and metal elements are separated and sent for recycling. It's now being run through a public-private partnership and will soon process lead, acid, batteries, and other solar equipment. To advance these efforts, we have established the Rwanda Cleaner Production and Climate Innovation Center. The center will ensure the products and services provided by both the public and private sectors embrace best practices in terms of climate resilience and the circular economy through technology and innovation. The center was set up following the success of a resource efficiency program that worked with businesses to reduce their environmental impact. The program led to cost savings of more than $3 million and a decrease of a considerable amount of carbon emissions, especially in tea factories. At the policy level, we recently revised the Rwanda's environment and climate change policy to incorporate the circular economy and organized the first ever Africa Green Growth Forum in November last year. Indeed, the government of Rwanda is developing green procurement guidelines. These initiatives are sending a clear signal that green growth and circular economy are the new priority for Rwanda and Africa as well. As the continent grows and develops, we need to avoid the take, make, waste approach and realize the opportunities that lie in the circular economy. The recently established African Circular Economy Alliance is a response to these opportunities. Launched at COP23 in Bonn, the alliance is co-chaired by Nigeria, South Africa, UN Environment, and Rwanda, with the support from the World Economic Forum and the Global Environment Facility. A number of other countries have also expressed a desire to join, including the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Malawi, Niger, and Senegal. We look forward to expanding the alliance and welcoming new members. The alliance aims to fast-track the uptake of the circular economy across the continent through the sharing of experience and the facilitation of new partnerships between public and private institutions by highlighting investment opportunities. That is also what I hope we achieve during today's sessions. I look forward to our discussions and finding new ways to work together to advance the circular economy in Africa. And I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Minister. I'm really in awe at a ministerial presentation that finishes 4 minutes ahead of schedule. So thank you so much for that. Yes, really impressive. Setting a very high bar. Don't get your hopes up. Setting a very high bar, please welcome up Dr. Anthony Nyong from the AFDB.
Thank you very much. I think Minister Biruta has really shown what resource efficiency is all about. I can stick to the time. So I'm here to talk about just give an overview of the circular economy in Africa. I'm showing this map so that I can put everything in perspective. This is a map of the world showing the vulnerability hotspots by 2017. And this is basically a map of Africa. It's important, we're not here really talking about climate change, but circular economy. We're talking about resource use. Where you have a situation where climate change is fast depleting, people will read out the numbers, the ecosystem services lost, the species lost, name them. Then on top of that, we have a continent that whose production systems is a bit resource intensive. Then you realize the solution we have is in a circular economy. How can we make our resource use more efficient? How can we be kinder on the resources that we have? For us at the African Development Bank, the circular economy is part of our main goal, our main objective of the green growth. 2012, we developed a 10-year strategy endorsed by every of our stakeholders, 54 African heads of states and their ministers of finance and economic planning, environment, and the other 27 member countries that make up the African Development Bank. And we had two objectives. The first is, how do we achieve inclusive growth? Because we realized the African continent was growing, but the growth wasn't inclusive. The second objective is, how do we transition Africa to a low to green growth? That was very important. So we've said our objective is to achieve inclusive green growth. And the way we've defined our green growth basically encompasses everything we're talking about here in the circular economy. We cannot be growing green when we are depleting resources, when we are inefficient. And like we heard this morning, that waste is a symbol, is an indication of inefficiency in our systems. So for that, at the African Development Bank, we've said this is very important. Fortunately, our stakeholders have endorsed it. So circular economy, green growth is very important for us. We have a 10-year strategy that focuses on that. At that time, it wasn't very popular. We started that work about 2009, finally got it approved 2012. It was at a point when people thought the African continent is not keen on these issues, but we knew that we were all very keen because we saw it as a way to go. The second thing we've done that is helping us is we have what we call our integrated safeguard systems. It's our environmental and social safeguards that protect what we do. Every of our investments must be seen not just to do harm, not that it's not doing harm to the continent, but it's actually doing good. And one of those operational safeguards is on resource efficiency, pollution. We ensure that our projects do not create harm on the continent. Any project we finance. So we think about efficiency, we think about the end product of that which we are financing, and so on. Then the third is that we have specific programs for climate change and for green growth, which, like I've said, encompass the circular economy. Right now, we've just completed an assessment of 7 countries on green growth investments because we realize private sector has an important role to play here. But the private sector, private capital is very timid. It just doesn't go out at you. It requires certain conditions. So we've picked 7 countries to assess to see, do they have the right environment, the right enabling structures, institutions, and policies that would allow private sectors to come into that space of the circular economy and green growth. We're working on what we call the Africa Green Growth Index that will rank African countries in terms of how prepared they are to receive or to invest in this program. Having seen what the African Development Bank is doing, we look at the circular economy in Africa. And like I mentioned this morning briefly, we're doing quite a lot. But most of what we do is silent. We really don't document this. But it's within our culture that we don't throw things away anyhow. If you've seen a typical African grandmother, you believe me. We have a way of keeping things for future use and so on. But on a serious note, like the minister has said, we have countries that have come together to say, let's pioneer this alliance on circular economy, because it is important for us. This is led internally by African countries. We also have seen that South Africa, for instance, recycles 43% of its plastics. in 2017. Compare that with 6% in the US and 1% in Europe. We have several African countries that have banned single-use plastics. We did not add Kenya there. And many more are coming because we realize it is important that we avoid this waste. Then we've worked with certain countries to help them develop green growth strategies that incorporate this circular economy. For some, we've taken them to the point of actually costing what they are. So what have we seen as drivers of the circular economy? First are the socioeconomic drivers. They're very important. We need to get industries to realize that you can actually decouple economic growth from resource intensity. They don't always have to go together. And that's one thing several African countries are now stepping up with us. That it might look expensive today, but honestly is the cheapest option to do. These stories, this evidence need to be made available. The second are the policy drivers. It's not the money, and we've not put money in there. Where you have the right policies, money will come. Private sectors, you don't need to ring a bell for them to come, they will come. When you have the right policies, you will have things work. So we're working with African countries in this aspect. Let's create the enabling policies for them. Then the shift to low carbon development pathway. That's the thing about Africa. If you go to any African event, you hear two phrases: low carbon, climate resilient development. We're a low emitting continent. We want to remain that way while we continue to grow. But there are also challenges. We've talked about technology. Do we have the right technologies? Do we have the right institutions? Thank God we've heard from what the minister has said, setting up a clean production and innovation center. We need to have that across many African countries. Then, do we have the right finances? It's not just the quantity of finance, but the right financial mechanisms. 2017, only 3% of the total climate change finance came to Africa. That's not good enough. We need to increase that number. 3% is extremely too low. We also have opportunities, job creation. We have an industry department set up at the bank to look at what are the technologies in the future. How can we begin to build the skill set that will allow us to take this on? If we have to do circular economy the way it has to be done, we will need people with the right skill set. Then we're also looking at integration of the informal sector. When we talk about the private sector, everybody thinks we're talking about those big things. For us on the African continent, our private sector is the small SMEs and the informal sector. We need to bring this together. And the list goes on and on. So what are the typical examples of what we've done? We've put them there. I won't go into too much thing. We've provided technical assistance to companies that want to do things. We provide loans, facilities. We provide green bonds. And we've created what we call Enable Youths that would allow our young people to get into this space. I've put together the sort of finance, extra little things we do beyond our main financing facility that we deploy about $10 billion every year. These are the ones that we know we can dedicatedly spend on climate finance. So I think with that, we are able to open up, and I made it right on time.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
I followed the minister.
Thank you very much for that, Anthony. I must admit, I doubted your ability on one of those slides, I thought. But thank you for finishing on time and making so many interesting remarks. You will have an opportunity to clap for them once they're all up, but let me just introduce to you who else is joining us on stage. Panelists, can I ask you to sit from Anthony's right, heading towards me? So Hauta Mokoena is with the African Circular Economy Alliance. Welcome. Veri Shaba is the CEO of Shaba Africa Green Building Solutions. Thank you for joining us. Following her, Edgar Edmond, who is the founder of Green Venture Recycles. Badir Ikin, who is with, he's the Director General of, okay, you've given me the full name, so I'll say it, the National Institute for Solar and New Energy. Is that correct? Fantastic, which is IRISEN. And last but not least, Monica Umwari, who is the Managing Director of Angaza. Please give them all a round of applause. Okay. We don't have a great amount of time, and so while it would be possible to talk about each country perspective in great amounts of details, the reality of what it looks like within each country context, it's not something that we can take on together. What our panelists will try and do for you is to give you a sense of the overall opportunities and challenges for the circular economy, particularly as there is an opportunity here to reach out to partners, to collaborators, but also to give a good dose of reality of what it looks like to work on the continent. So I'm just setting expectations in terms of what we're expecting to hear and reminding you, including on the words that Anthony said earlier, that you can use the app to start to submit any questions through. So just to kick us off, each of our panelists will have just 2 to 3 minutes to set out their stall, all by answering this question. Panelists, what are the opportunities that exist in the circular economy space from where you sit, and how are you harnessing them from each of your organizational perspectives? Okay, so let's start with you, Hauta.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and also for invitation by the forum. From South Africa, I'm in the Ministry for Environment.
Let me just check that everyone can hear. Can you hear him? No, from the back. Thank you. I don't think there's anything that you need to do. Just try again for me.
I'm Hauta Mukwena from Ministry for Environment in South Africa.
Good.
Chief Director responsible for chemicals and waste policy monitoring and evaluation. I thought let me mention that part since you mentioned more the forum, but I'm happy to be here and glad to be part of the team as Minister has indicated that is through and under his leadership on circular economy. It's great and a lot that is taking place in South Africa, opportunities that are there that we are looking at. Starting at policy level, to get into enablers and policy direction. We're saying on circular economy, on materials that can be reused for circular economy, we discount that from a list of waste. So hence we have what we call exclusion regulations. Exclusion regulations that are actually saying on certain materials that were previously in the list requiring licenses, they're no longer licensed. But they no longer require a license, and hence to enable the use of that material. Together with that is opportunity for economic development as well as job creation. So we have a program we call Recycling Enterprise Support Program, where we're supporting SMMEs and encouraging them to establish through a funding. But there is a need for technical expertise that we have partnered with our National Cleanup Production Center for South Africa on the technical as well as operational side of the business for it to be sustainable and continue contributing to circular economy. Thank you.
Brilliant. Very, same question to you. So what do the opportunities look like? What are you doing from where you sit?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I am Very Shaba, and I am the founder and CEO of a company called Shaba Africa. We are based in Johannesburg, but I have traveled to 12 African countries where we specifically speak to them about green buildings. And the whole idea is that green buildings and the green economy is an enabler for the circular economy. Because until every single one of us in this room actually understands what green buildings are, that's where we can actually start making an impact in terms of green growth and in terms of the circular economy. What we've seen is that buildings consume 12% in terms of energy, and buildings also generate about 40% waste in terms of solid waste. And so there's the opportunity where if we can just start intervening a lot more in green buildings on the African continent, then we'll be able to start, first of all, educating people, because every single one of us lives or works or plays in a building. So then we'll start being able to make it more relatable and educating the people on the ground about what the circular economy really is, so that everyone understands it. But also then we can start generating less waste so that we don't have to try figure out how to recycle it because it's less generated to start off with. So that's what we do focus on as a business. And another thing that we do as well is that we do help to establish what is called green building councils across the African continent. So currently, I'm faculty and an assessor with the Green Building Council of South Africa, and they're currently the chair of the African Network of Green Building Councils, and the vice chair for that is Kenya. But the idea behind that is that through green building councils, more and more people would be able to understand how to implement and apply the circular economy within their buildings, because that's a start. And once we get that right, then I think we'll be able to start being able to pull that into other industries. The last thing that I do want to mention is that I am a mechanical engineer. And another thing that I've just found is that a lot of the times the women's voices aren't really heard when it comes to the circular economy. And so we are part of what is called Women in Tech, so that we can get more and more African women to be able to understand how they can be a part of the circular economy. And how we can, because a lot of the times, if you look at the SDGs, the women do have a big part to play as well in moving this industry forward. So that's what I do as an engineer and the owner of a business in South Africa, focusing on green buildings within the circular economy.
Thank you. To you, Edgar, please, as a young entrepreneur, how would you answer that question about the opportunities you see?
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Edgar Edmund, founder of Green Venture, which is a local recycling company in Tanzania. So I started the company 3 years ago after seeing the need of reducing plastic waste, and at the same time I saw a big opportunity because most of the people cannot afford construction. So I really thought using plastics as a mode of construction would really be a good opportunity. So after coming up with an idea where we convert our plastic waste into building materials, so we make bricks from plastic waste. So we have over 100 people who work for collection. So we have different collection points, and we pay people who collect these plastics per kg, then transform them into building blocks, which are used by construction companies. So among the major challenges that we have faced, coming up with the idea when I was just 15, first of all, it would be very big difficult to finance the construction of the machines and everything. Regarding at the age of 15, you can't just go to a bank and take a loan and do all of that. So that was a very big challenge to me, but despite that, it didn't stop me. And I always knew there's, if this business becomes successful, also the environment is going to be cleaner because people are going to be incentivized to collect plastic waste. And the other thing that we are working on is making sure that we diversify in the products that we are making. So apart from bricks, we are also moving into plastic lumber, which we're going to create plastic lumber, which is going to replace wood. So instead of people cutting down trees, plastic is going to help people in making furniture from plastics.
Awesome. I think when you said what age you started at, I could almost hear the cogs in everyone's mind doing the math as to how old you are now. It is, and also perhaps feeling a little curious about what they were doing at 15. But wonderful to hear your interventions. Badr, please, your turn.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Badrika, and I'm in charge of IRISEN. IRISEN is a funding agency for applied research projects in the field of green technologies. And we have as well a network of applied research platform. The first one was established for solar energy and called the Green Energy Park. And the idea was to support our national strategy, which has a focus on renewables and especially solar energy. We started with solar energy. The second research platform is dedicated for green buildings, energy efficiency in buildings, smart grids. This is as well a kind of energy efficiency, and sustainable mobility. The third one is a research platform for the Nexus water energy. And the fourth one is a platform called Green Hydrogen and Green Ammonia. and I will as well then say why. I wanted to speak, because of the time, only about then 3 topics, and I think then 2 topics are or would be very important for Africa. I will start with the first one. The first one is, of course, then the use of and the reuse of materials for the eco-construction. We saw, for example, there are opportunities to use a lot of agricultural waste, fibers of plants to develop products and components for the for buildings. This is very important, and there is still a lot to do. But I wanted to speak about then 2 topics. The first one is the topic of the energy storage and the development of an ecosystem for batteries. We heard a few weeks ago there is an initiative of the SMAP of the World Bank, the Partnership for Energy Storage. It means for the near future, we don't have only then for every country between 5 tons till 10 tons of plastic bags coming, but we will have millions and 100 millions of tons of batteries. And this is very important now because we might then use them. We might then have an ecosystem to use the batteries as well for the residential area to store energy and to try to develop real businesses, not only regarding the product, which would come from Asia, but regarding services. And this is very important because we have to see as well the problems which we might then have to fight in the future. The second very important topic for us, when we started in Morocco now with a lot of renewables, and we have important and big power plants, is the topic of hydrogen. To produce green hydrogen, this is as well very important because in the near future, in 10, 15 years, it would be possible to have then a circular economy regarding the energy sector, the industrial sector, as well as the transport sector based on the hydrogen. And this is very important. And for all the countries, and we have a lot of countries in Africa with huge resources, solar, wind, hydro sometimes, and this mix might open a lot of opportunities. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Last but not least, Monica, please.
Yeah, so Mwari Monica from Rwanda and Managing Director of Angaza. So Angaza is basically a Kiswahili word that means to shed light. So we're trying to shed light on different concepts of managing waste by upcycling. The first time I told people that I'm in upcycling, they're like, what is upcycling? So yeah, so it's basically repurposing something, giving something new life. And when I started this business, everybody thought I started before its time, but I'm glad that I could actually, it's now the time, but I'm glad that I was one of the pioneers in upcycling. So I run an eco brand, and what it does, it upcycles discarded advertising banners and old clothes into everyday use accessories. So for us, I mean, I'm not very technical. Some people are saying I'm an engineer. I basically just wanted to do something that people can relate to, like she said, relate. You buy a bag from us and you know that you're contributing to the environment. You know that this was something that was going to kind of pollute land, but then you reuse it as an accessory. And so that's what we do. We create environmental awareness, we provide environmental education, we create green jobs. Currently, I'm working with the deaf, so even a deaf person can actually preserve the environment. It doesn't have to be something that is rocket science, but in your small way, you can actually be part of the circular economy, and that is what I really do. And I'm glad that our minister is here, so that means we're actually doing a lot in Rwanda, and I'm glad that I could be part of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we come to your questions, I just want to abuse my privilege as moderator to dig in a little deeper into some of the things you said. Monica, if I may start with you, you know, as a Cameroonian living in London, I'm often really fascinated by the language used around sustainability, and that actually the pressure usually is placed on the consumer, right? If you demand, then companies will do, and until you demand, we'll just carry on business as usual. with what your model is, are you worried that that there won't be enough momentum for change if you don't have a market that can buy your recycled products, that understands the value of doing that, especially as connected to the environment?
I don't think okay. I didn't really understand the question.
So, the question is this. I put her on the spot. We didn't prepare for this one. The question is this: if you need a market base to buy upcycled products, and usually that is because you're sold the value of it as being good for the environment, hopefully aesthetically pleasing also, but definitely good for the environment. You are doing your bit as an ethical consumer. That puts the pressure on the consumer, and yet your model requires that consumer to buy your product. So do you think that with what you're doing in Rwanda, do you need that sort of pressure? Do you need that ethical consumer to drive the change? Or is that part of a bigger strategy in your opinion?
I think I would need the consumer to actually understand the benefit of the product while they're buying the product. That's why I'm talking about the education that they have to put around these eco-conscious products. So I think the consumer definitely will drive the need for the product. Yeah.
Anyone else can jump on that from your perspectives. I saw people nodding.
Yeah. Maybe if you allow me, this is clear that we have to sensitize people and all the consumers. And this is what we saw, for example, when we organized in Morocco then the COP22. It was very important to see all the commitment of a lot of people. But at the same time, I think this is very, very important to have as well more cooperation between state and the private sector to build joint commissions. This is maybe as well then one step, and then later on to try to push. We heard before about incentives for fossil fuels and so on, but we have maybe then more to think about new ways to support such kind of businesses through incentives. It means we have to try to find then a way, and this is important to have then more cooperation and to have a regulatory framework coming from the state in cooperation with the private sector.
Anthony, you had said this morning about, for those who were not here, there was just a quick briefing that about the amount of money that African countries are putting towards subsidies for fossil fuels, etc. What is the kind of narrative shift that we need so that actually the sort of support that Badr has just mentioned starts to flow better? Because I feel like there is going to be a bit of a challenge between current practice and where we want to be and getting people culturally into the right space. So how do we move those subsidies? How do we make that shift?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think for us, we really need that political will. It's not that we don't know what needs to be done. Our leaders know, the minister is here. They are taking very giant strides to do certain things. And we have said it is not, when we have a mindset that we're doing it for others, we probably wouldn't do it well. But when we look at it, there are benefits for the country to do certain things, they will do it well. I mentioned this morning that we spend about 22 times on subsidy than what we spend actually on the energy itself. And that does not allow investors to come in because we've over-subsidized these initiatives that people really can't come to play in it. So if we stepped back a little bit and asked, how can we reform this subsidy so that people, entrepreneurs like this, can have access to resources to do what needs to be done? And let me quickly add, African countries, like others, have submitted what we call the nationally determined contributions to climate change. And for that, we've seen, they say we'll need about $3 trillion by 2030 to implement that. And I stepped back and I said, wow, this is a large market. It means inside that nationally determined contribution of that country, there are initiatives that they have identified that would contribute to the circular economy, that the private sector will be the one to do. Why don't we change our narrative, seeing climate change as doom and gloom, to actually seeing that there are indeed opportunities that can be taken advantage of in this initiative? And so for us at the African Development Bank, we've said, yes, we don't have enough, but over the next 5 years, 6 years, we're putting in $25 billion as our own investment towards that. And I'm sure that's sufficient to also leverage other people's resources to make sure that we are on the right track in terms of circular economy.
I think what I want to say is, so I've been involved in quite a bit of advocacy work across the continent in terms of green. A lot of exactly what you said, Africa wants to go green. We do want to be a part of the circular economy. There are 3 factors that have a part to that, and that's private sector, that's public sector, which is government, and it's research institutions. So that's universities. And if we can get those 3 speaking to each other and forming those relationships between Europe, Africa, countries that have done it before, countries who haven't, then we'll be able to progress that a lot further as well. If you look at C40 cities, there are 9 African countries that have actually ratified and said by 2030 they want new buildings to be net zero carbon. And so we have said that. I do want to also honor the Minister of Rwanda and even South Africa as well in terms of environmental affairs, because there are countries that, in order to do advocacy, it was about businesses. It was about getting more people to understand it. In universities now, we learn about the circular economy. So I think that it's not so much if the consumer is willing or not. I think that it's the angle we go at it. If we go at it in terms of ethics and hugging trees, people aren't really going to buy into it. But if we go at it in terms of the economy, that you save money. If you use less energy, you'll save money. If you use less water, you'll save money. Generate less waste, you'll save money. So I think once we started going in that angle, more commercial clients and more people started to buy into the idea of the circular economy.
Edgar, it was really interesting. Sorry, yes, please do.
Just to add on the issue of community viewing the products and the material produced green is usually challenges indicating the price variation. So hence, more especially from recycled material versus from virgin material, to say what is cheaper, what is cheaper to a reasonable price so that the consumer can afford. I think the issue of our awareness is key, because with the awareness that even if it doesn't look cheaper now, in the long run, there's more benefits. It will drive the society and the consumer towards a direction where they will buy the environmental goods and services, no matter at what cost and price they come with at present moment. There's always discussion also from the collection side, because that which get recycled, reused, has to be collected. Also, the issue of price, to say how much are the waste collectors downstream informal sector is receiving on what they've collected, is always an issue and a challenge that is always raised with governments, to say how do we get that right to avoid a situation where only the upstream that recycle and reprocess that material has more gain. So an issue that will need to be looked at in much more detail, to say how do you balance, more especially for the collectors, to avoid them collecting for nothing, but there's at least something that will still make them to make a living out of collection, as well as those that are now in the commercial business on the products that are there, to trade fairly as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Edgar, I just wanted to put, and I'm starting to use, thank you all for using the app. We have more questions than we will have time to take. It's very good to see. So I'm going to start to incorporate some of these. Jason Horling was asking about how can creativity of African entrepreneurs, innovators, and young people be better supported, and I can't think of anyone better to answer that question. So how could you have been better supported? How well did that go in practice, and how could it go differently?
So the first important thing is, for people, most of the youth in Africa, they have a brilliant idea, but most of the people tend to think, when is the right time for me to act? So with me, I thought you really need to act as soon as possible, as urgent as the problem is, because the more you wait, the bigger the problem it becomes. And ways that young people in Africa can be supported with these ideas, first of all, is the platforms for them to present what they have, because always, if it's not presented, then it's difficult even for people who want to support to see it. So I think platforms and media coverage is very important, because it will enable more people to see what young people are doing, and also in terms of funding. So I think maybe the different institutions in Africa should organize specific funds that can enable young innovators to scale up their ideas. And this is because most of the institutions don't tend to, especially financial institutions, don't tend to have belief in young entrepreneurs. Because I was able to start a business and it's running till now, and I didn't even, haven't yet graduated from high school. So it shows how viable is it to believe in young people. And I don't think age is really a factor to believe in young entrepreneurs.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about the importance of intellectual property protection and how often you're likely to be snapped up very quickly by a Harvard or an Oxford, and your intellectual property becomes theirs, and how much we need young people like you with your ideas on the continent. There's a question here about how can a company present a circular economy project to be financed by the AFDB, by Joao Fernandez. That's a question for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have a very strong private sector facility at the African Development Bank. And once you're a member of the African Development Bank, either you're one of the 54 African countries or the 27 non-African countries that make up the African Development Bank, we have our guidelines. We're very visible on the web, or you can send a message to me, let's have your project. But one thing we've not been very good at, let me confess, is that most of our financing have always gone to the bigger players. The reason being, we don't want to crowd out the other financial institutions. But when we saw the gap in that, we've created financing vehicles that now allow us to look at the SMEs and the smaller people. Initially, if the project was less than $30 million, we wouldn't go there as a private sector operator. But we've created the type I showed there at the board, several initiatives that can allow us to finance smaller institutions. So I don't know what a project is like, but we have a private sector window, and I wouldn't mind if the fellow gets in touch with me. At the end of it, we can discuss.
This is a good point to say that actually our panelists will all be available after the session, if that's correct still. I'm trying to catch an eye. You can please grab them. Yes, Verna? Okay, excellent. So that there are lots of questions that came through that were very specific to specific individuals, and perhaps those will be better had as face-to-face conversations so that we can take the more top-line ones that everyone can benefit from. So I think everyone is available to chat afterwards. Yes?
Just a short intervention in that. Also on our Recycling Enterprise Support Program, the funding that is there is very limited, so hence it's very important for the applicants to meet that particular criteria that is set. And unfortunately, you might have an excellent project, but just the packaging now of that which you want to request funding for is very important. If there's 1, 2, 3 documents that you need to supply, even if it looks administrative or minor, please do so, because it increases your chances of getting the funding. Thank you.
Do you offer webinars to help people who want to apply? Because that seems like a good opportunity before they do, that you provide some specific guidance.
Certainly, we do roadshows before we issue a call for applicants to submit their proposals. Towards the end of the current roadshows, then we'll be issuing out the calls. We below 5 million South African rands in terms of funding.
Brilliant, thank you. But Eric, I want to come to you because there's a question here. Forgive me if I abuse anyone's names. Herman Bavnik, who talks about the low cost of waste disposal hampering the attempts to implement circular economy. What can realistically be done about this? You were talking about policies around waste disposal. I remember in the news, I think is it Malaysia? And last week in the news has started turning back waste. You were framing it as an opportunity for Africa. Talk more about waste disposal.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and this is what my colleague from Rwanda said, we need the cooperation with research institutions and universities, not only to identify the value of waste, but to develop new products and new materials, because at the end, this is an issue of the value of waste. And I think there is a real opportunity to valorize them. What we did, for example, in Morocco, we established one commission called the New Climate Economy Commission, with involving private companies, the private sector, as well as the public sector, to try to identify for very important sectors like the blue economy, renewables, the energy efficiency in different sectors, as well as the sustainable mobility, then to try to help to work then together. And this is important, as I said, to identify really then the value of products, to develop the new products, because this is possible. I give one example then before when I spoke about acoustic isophonic insulation panels. Those are very expensive panels, which might be then developed using fibers of very cheap plants and wastes.
Thank you. Can I ask you, Very, there's a question here from Maita. And of course, anyone can speak to it, but please forgive me, given the time that we have, it would be difficult to get every panelist to speak to every question. So I'm just picking one, but of course you can jump in. What policy and regulatory barriers do you encounter for your circular economy local initiatives?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think it adds up to what the previous question was, two previous questions. In terms of the low cost of waste, it's so easy to throw anything away. And so a lot of that requires a mindset shift, because the only way to get change is either through punitive measures where you punish someone, or through incentives measures where you incentivize them. And so some of the barriers that we found is that economically people think, is it worth it, is it not? And so when you now start educating people to understand that, I mean, for instance, now in South Africa, there's a thing where you collect all your waste, you take it to one of the shopping centers, and they'll give you a voucher to be able to use it in your shopping center. And so when everyone starts working together in terms of figuring out ways to either incentivize or punish, we can't really punish with our local initiatives, but we can incentivize. And so when we start getting that right, then that's definitely helped us to overcome that. The challenge is really right now, it's mindset. People I won't say in Africa, because Africa is huge and there are people who get it, but not everyone understands the circular economy and the green economy and all of that. Not a lot of people get it. Well, so it's awareness.
Can we talk to this a bit? Because what we heard the minister say and what we often talk about is that actually in lots of communities, in people's households, they're practicing this but not calling it by that name. Where does the problem essentially lie? Are we suggesting that Africans talking about the continent, low-income households are more likely to do this, and that the risk is when countries move into middle income that they will follow bad practices from elsewhere? Or are we saying that actually even now in our native and indigenous practices that we do not do this right?
We're not contextualizing it to Africa enough. So I think that's where the gap falls. There's certain things that specifically, like for instance, in buildings are created, Northern Hemisphere, we want insulation, versus in Southern Hemisphere, or where it's more hard, you actually want the air to leak out a little bit in your facades. And so I think we haven't contextualized it. We haven't involved different economic stratospheres. It's a thing called indigenous knowledge systems. Our grandmothers probably know best about how to build the most sustainable houses because they used to use what is now called rammed earth, but they used to use clay to build their houses, and it was sustainable. And so I think that everyone has a part to play in the circular economy, but we're not speaking to each other enough, and we're also copying and pasting things from other continents and putting it into, or even other countries, and putting it into our countries and context.
Monica, I see you nodding. Let me bring her in because she hasn't spoken. Would you like to add to that what your grandmother knows? Your grandmother should actually be on this panel with us because we're clearly leading in this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with how the indigenous knowledge systems, yes, they were done long time ago, but I think someone talked about documentation. I think the terms that we're using, circular economy, so it seems like it's a new term, but we're actually practicing them, but we just need to document them and people actually know that it's being done. Because I could give an example of how, how some schools are practicing it. You bring your waste to school and it works as school fees. But a child in the village can't actually know that he's contributing to the circular economy. But people are actually doing it. Yes. And yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
That's fantastic. In fact, somebody, Henry Ibitolu, was asking about indigenous green solutions.
Yes.
I did a series in journalism about ancient futures, the ideas that were old and have been abandoned that are actually coming back to help us solve some of our problems.
Just an input on why policies and regulations, they are there to help standardize, they are there to help level the playing field, they are there to enable business to happen in a particular authorized and standardized manner. It's also for polluter pays principle, but we're saying through circular economy, we can't always use the stick. So we're bringing a carrot and a stick type of a situation. So for the stick, you'll definitely need policy and legislation. And then for the carrot part, you need economic instruments that will help encourage, motivate people's behavior to comply with policy and legislation. Thank you.
Yes, please, Anthony.
Yeah, thanks. Let me quickly add something on policy and regulations. You know, we have a situation now that most of Africa's energy is going to be off-grid. And the off-grid means we're going to have a lot of solar panels, a lot of batteries. Like my colleague said, hundreds, millions of batteries are coming in. How many African countries have in place regulations for either battery buyback or something that will allow us to recycle those batteries? How many African countries have facilities, the minister has mentioned, that actually will recycle these batteries? What becomes of these batteries when we bring them in and 2 years later, 3 years later, they are dead? This is an opportunity. This is something we need to deal with because we are seeing a situation that we might be solving one problem. We've not allowed it to go through that circular economy motion that we will have children recruited from poor neighborhoods to break those batteries and retrieve the lead and other things, and then increase lead poisoning or other things. So I think when we talk about the circular economy, let's not think it's about bad agricultural practices. Even the new things we're doing now, we need to talk about them. This morning I mentioned the cell phone. Many years ago, we had phones we used for 5 years, cameras we used for God knows how many years. Now they come out every year, new models. What are we doing about this? And for those of us on the African continent who can't afford new phones, we buy used phones. And this is dumping. It's not helping anyone in the circular economy. So I think we need to talk about this, that for those who are creating these facilities, there has to be a deterrent type of tax if they do not recycle, take it end to end. And if you sell batteries to a particular country, there should be a policy that says when those batteries die, you need to come pick them up so that you can go recycle them. And until we have such policies in place, I don't think we will be doing justice to ourselves going forward in the green economy space.
Well, panelists, how far do we think we are from that sort of reality where the policies that we're making aren't so much short-termist, but can think about the end-to-end, and we have the bargaining power to put those demands in place. Were you going to say something to that?
Yeah, so I think also companies should be responsible for like products that they produce. So like most of the companies that manufacture, like I can speak for, let's say, plastics products, like they should be responsible to either work with companies that recycle their waste, because it's their responsibility to make sure like the environment is not threatened by the products they create, instead of just leaving the whole responsibility to like the and people that recycle the waste. And with policies, I think also, especially with plastic pollution, should be a collective thing. I don't think it's a work for individual countries. So let's say countries like the country I come from, Tanzania, has banned the use of plastic bags. If the neighboring countries still are in use of the plastic bags, and you can say like the ocean is not restricted to certain countries, so plastics can still get into the ocean from another country and be moved anywhere around the world.
In fact, the chances that they come from quite far away, don't they?
So I think it should be a collective thing. We should speak as one and also unify the policies, because we all use the same earth. So I don't think it's an individual responsibility.
Well, while you have the floor, there's a question here from Daniel from Reframe, who's saying, isn't your initiative, plastic bricks, isn't that solution, is that a solution for a problem now? Isn't it just postponing the problem? Because essentially it's dealing with the end result of plastics, but we are still, in West Africa, these plastic, the water sachets has done terrible things to the environment.
Yeah, I think it's a solution, because let's take a simple example of Tanzania. It has banned the use of plastic bags, but for the last 20 years, we have been producing billions and billions of bags. And these bags takes more than 100 years to decompose. That means they're somewhere in the environment. So despite that, we are not producing more plastic bags, but there are already bags that are existing. And we need to use these bags. And as what we are doing, we are using them for construction. And as you use the plastic bricks for construction, you can always recycle it again and again.
Livingston Mugisha says, circular economy is something Africans understand more than anyone else. This is something that we have been practicing in our societies. The issue is the more we accumulate wealth, the more we lose this amazing trait. And the idea that somehow plastic is aspirational. How do we, what does that look like from a North African perspective?
But this is a statement, but in the fact, when we see the averages in Europe, for example, we know that around about 40 till 50% of the waste is reused and recycled. In Africa, the average is less than 10%. This is not today. This is not really then the case. We are losing, and we are not really then reusing and recycling.
So we're comparing formal sector to informal, right? Because in people's households and in the villages, but then actually that is not how our formal systems operate. Yeah,
definitely. But I think we need, I will do briefly an analogy to carbon taxation. A few years ago, we thought this will really then help to start to develop and to use clean energy, to have renewable energy, and then to be able maybe then to sell it and to have an advantage if we have then to use then clean energy. And this has to be, as you said, more framework and the policy, regional policy. This would be then very important. And I think we need such kind of approach as well regarding then the circular economy, as well regarding recycling, as well as regarding all the laws regarding the different products. We spoke then today morning about the use of toxic components in a lot of materials. It is very important to try to have then a regional laws and the regional then policy. This will really then help and motivate countries then to do this and to go in this direction.
There was a comment here, followed by a question, which I think is valid, but the comment says, our grandmothers did circular economy as well, but then came modern times, and materials and consumption society. So how do we leapfrog that phrase? I imagine, as someone who's deeply interested in narrative, that the idea that somehow modern times is separate from the circular economy of all, that is actually quite challenging because it implies that what you're saying to people, what you're saying your grandmother did was backwards, right? So how do we encourage people along? How do we encourage our policymakers, particularly when there's a specific view of development in mind, without saying that, without making the case that what you're doing is about modernity?
Just maybe to kickstart, I'll agree with my colleagues, fellow panelists, on the regional approach. So hence the Africa Alliance on Circular Economy is one such platform to assist us to compare notes, experiences, and best practices to see how well we can do on circular economy as a continent. Also agree with the fellow panelists on the issue of extended producer responsibility, which is quite key. In South Africa, we've introduced it according to different waste streams. We started with waste tire to say a particular fee for that to ensure recycling of material from the tire waste stream. We have paper and packaging, lighting, as well as electronic waste. In terms of regulated extended producer responsibility, we do have others which we call voluntary schemes, where you find that recycling and industry takes initiatives on their own per waste stream to recycle their material. And the issue of the indigenous knowledge can never be overemphasized. Is key. We're saying as Africa, we have been doing circular economy, but it might not have been called that previously, but the reuse, the recirculation of the products and the material such that we are able to have very little that end up in the landfill site. But yes, as we're saying, it might be times that with consumption in the sustainable consumption and production situation, with time it might be seen with consumption as if you are well off, whereas no, we need to change the mindset to say you must have less and less to indicate that you are better. Thank you.
I know there are a few other comments that people would like to make on that, but I wonder if I could throw in more questions, because the downside of using the app and not the floor is that actually you limit it to 6 or whatever, and now I have a ton and feeling a great sense of responsibility to ask as many of these as we can. The very first question we had was about how to increase the uptake of circular economy in wastewater treatment. So I think between Veri or Anthony, you were planning on going next. Would you be able to speak to that as well? Or
yeah, I think let's, when I started, I said, let's not want to be like those who want to be like us. We're a low-emitting continent on the the African continent. But we're finding situations that others are saying it is actually important to go low. We started riding bicycles. Then the cars came, and we looked at it like a status symbol. Why would you ride a bicycle? Because you're poor. Then suddenly we have to buy a car. And then for advanced countries like Finland, who have actually seen the benefits of cycling, are abandoning cars to go back to cycling. And that's how it is. So it's sustainable consumption. We need to factor that into our production systems that let us do that which is necessary. My colleague here talked about mindset. If I went back to my village and started riding bicycle, I'm sure they'll think there's something wrong with me. Because that's the way the society is. We need to have that change in mindset to allow people to know that the fact that you can buy Coca-Cola or any other thing to drink does not show that you're rich. Or that you're better off than the person that takes a glass of cold water. Better. But it's just that mindset. So talking about what on water facility?
Wastewater treatment.
Well, it's a very important thing. I think most African countries at some point, either some urban centers, have it. We have a full program in the bank for urban sanitation, where we finance the wastewater treatment because we know it is a very important aspect. Most times we find ourselves using treated water to water our gardens, to wash our cars, to mold blocks and all those things. And we realize it's a waste when we have that. So we have programs on the continent that are actually financing wastewater treatment because we think it is important. One area that is going to lead to major wars very soon will be water, water scarcity. And we see that, and we think it is very important that as much as possible, let it be recycled.
Panelists, we cannot have a discussion about the continent of Africa without talking about China. So Phoebe Blackburn asks, China is investing a great deal in Africa. Is there any collaboration going on with the circular economy? If anyone has any knowledge of this, I'd like to add other big investors on the continent, whether they be Brazil or Saudi or Turkey, because we tend to focus solely on China's involvement. Does anyone understand or can speak to China's role in circular economy?
Let me do that.
Head of the class.
I have done a comment after.
Okay. Please go ahead and then we'll take...
it's a difficult, exactly what you've said. For us as the African Development Bank, we don't look at where you come from. Every investor is an investor. And we ensure that your investments must not do harm to the continent.
So the question is, what is China's investment in circular economy on the continent, if we can speak to that?
That's what I'm saying. Very few projects specifically look at it like this is a circular economy project.
I see.
But it is a project that we know, whether it's in energy, whether it's in water, whether it has incorporated elements of circular economy in it. And so what we did, we started that about 7 years ago. We instituted what we call the China-Africa Environment Program. And the goal was to make sure that we followed Chinese companies, because there were a lot of complaints about China, and I don't really know why. So we followed the Chinese companies to make them build environmental sustainability into their investments on the continent. It took a while, but after about 3 years, we got the acceptance. They now adopted the African Development Bank's environmental safeguards policy as the policy for every Chinese contractor operating outside of China in Africa. So it shows the extent to which they're willing to go do what needs to be done. But then there are two sides to the coin. Our own countries also should be able to enforce standards. I've met contractors who are not just Chinese, whether they are British, they follow rules. If your country says walk past, they will walk past. If your country says jump 1 meter, they will jump 1 meter. So we realized that what we needed to do was to go back to the African countries and say, please enforce your environmental and social standards. When you do that, it doesn't matter whether it's a Chinese company or an American company. They will be forced to do what is right. So sometimes I think I demand a little bit more from our countries, that whatever it is that needs to be done, let's put those standards ahead. And it doesn't matter whether you're Chinese or Japanese, then you will do the right thing. Yes.
We have just 5 more minutes before we have to go to our closing speaker. So I always want to provide an opportunity to round up our conversation. It has been so wide-sprawling, but at the same time, there have been just a couple of things that we have talked on. We've talked a lot about consumer awareness, about changing mindsets, and in various dribs and drabs about policy. And as you can tell from the questions that we have, so many more factors, from cooperatives to specific policies, that we haven't been able to talk on. So speaking to this audience then, as we're sat here in Helsinki, from each of your perspectives, what is the one thing that you think needs to happen to get us from where we are now to where you think we need to be in terms of circular economy in Africa, recognizing that we have an East African, a Southern African, West African perspectives and North African perspectives. Let's start with you, Monica. What would you say to this audience about what you think you need to see happen for the work that you do to be taken to the next level?
I think people need to change the mindset of saying that trash is just waste. Trash can actually bring cash. So they need to just change the mindset. Sometimes people would say that, why and there are other materials that you can use to make bags. I'm like, no, I believe that this trash can actually be turned into something of use. So it's basically changing their mindset to the because you already have the resources that could help us in this circular economy, but it's changing their mindset. How do they see these resources?
So this audience agrees with you. So how can they help you?
How can they help? It's coming on board and working with me, you know.
So they should find you afterwards, is
should
what you're
find-
saying. You don't want to put all your cards on the table right now. No,
no.
I understand. Okay, please.
Thank you. Well, I think we have to try to educate and sensitize more people. If I have to give an example, I studied as well mechanical engineering. I studied in the Technical University of Berlin, and I remember when I did the course of production technology. And production technology doesn't mean only then to produce a component, but all the part of the value chain. But I remember we did maybe 50 courses about to design, to build, and maybe then 2 days about reuse and recycling. This is very important to adapt curricula and then to speak about this very important topic. This is one point. And the second one, which I would like as well then to highlight, is the need to cooperate then more as well in the African level and continent. We have to believe more in our skills. We have to have more North-South and more North-South-South and more South-South cooperation. This is very important to strengthen this cooperation, because I think then together we might be then able to change the minds, to change the situation in the next years.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, well, I believe in order for us to attain a circular economy, the energy and the effort that we had put toward that has led to creation of the problem, we should be able to put a similar or even more energy in solving the problem. So to the amount of money that we invest in producing these products, I think a similar effort should be used in actually recycling the products in order to attain a circular economy. Other than that, I think it would be difficult to attain circular economy. And also, I think in the African perspective, I think local investments are very important for attaining circular economy in Africa, meaning it's important for even private and public companies within the specific countries to invest in their countries to enable circular economy without only waiting for external investment in the circular economy.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's been 10 years since the Green Building Council of South Africa started in South Africa. 10 years later, we only have 400 green buildings out of millions. And I think the biggest reason, because we all sat back and we were like, okay, why is this the case? Why isn't there uptake? And the reason is because of contextualization. We laugh a little about the grandmother statement, but it really is indigenous knowledge systems looks like how Finland uses a lot of timber to build, because it just works. It's indigenous knowledge. That's what it is. So I would say that one thing that I think we would love to have more of from a business perspective and engineering perspective is, I think technology is the answer to this. In terms of the fourth industrial revolution coming up, if we had to get EdTech, then more and more people would be able to understand what the circular economy is. If we had clean tech, then more people would have access to internet wherever they are in Africa, so that they can understand more about everything, including being able to take even online courses that will be able to explain what the circular economy is. I think that it's that we are lacking, is really just if we're able to scale the whole idea of the circular economy more through technology, I think that would be able to push us forward in terms of the circular economy from a business perspective.
When we hosted our first circular economy dialogue in 2017 in South Africa, it was because of the partnership between South Africa and the EU on the SA-EU dialogue facility. This says partnership, partnership, partnership. We can implement circular economy, but it needs resources, it needs expertise. So we can do more if there can be collaboration. So I see participation, collaboration through the Africa Alliance on Circular Economy, as well as country-to-organization, country-to-country partnership, going to assist us in ensuring that we do get circular economy implemented across the board and throughout Africa, and also help us to respond to the issues of job creation, economic development, as well as ensuring that we divert waste away from going to landfill. Waste is a resource. What currently goes to landfill site or dump site is wasted material, and we would want to reuse that. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, let me thank the government of Finland for really organizing this event. It's quite important. And the fact that we are here representing the African continent is an indication that Finland is keen to actually see that action takes place where it actually deserves to take place. We're at a point of underdevelopment, and we believe that underdevelopment in Africa is not a curse, it's a blessing, that we can do things right the first time without having to go retrofit. And I think that is one thing that should come out of this, that we have what it takes. We need the partnership, like my colleague has said. I mentioned the business opportunities on the continent. I want to see more Finnish companies come in to say, all these batteries coming in, let's set up a recycling plant. The solar panels coming in, let's set up a recycling plant. Something, if you have it here, I'm sure it will be the sort of business that when you come into the African continent, you'll be smiling every second to the bank when you help set up that. You're not only going to reduce the waste, but you're going to see the level of profit and money that you can make. So we need to see more of those partnerships and more of those collaborations, like my colleague has said. So thank you very much.
A round of applause to our panelists, please. Thank you.
If I may have 20 seconds, I would like to do one information about one invitation.
Oh,
if you allow me.
go on then.
Thank you very much.
You've already begun.
We spoke about the youth. I would like to invite you, because we will organize in September 2019 one huge event called the Solar Decathlon Africa, with 1,200 students coming from 58 universities, 20 countries from Africa, and those students will build a small city, 20 houses, greenhouses, smart houses using only solar energy. And I wanted then to tell you this, and I would be then happy to see you and then to meet you again in Morocco, in Marrakesh.
We're not quite done yet. We have closing remarks from Yako Kangas-Nemi. Did I get that right? Thank you for being gracious. Managing Director and CEO of the Fin Fund. Please welcome him up for a final remarks.
Please see the panel. I don't know how many panels I've seen, or some of them even participated in, that have been discussing about African issues and being consisting of only non-Africans. Sometimes even just they have been all white males. And this time I'm the only one in that category. And even I'm here probably just because this is hosted by Finland and sort of in a host country in a way representative. But I think it's great that we are here. That when African issues are discussed, they are discussed not by others and about Africa, but they are Africans are keenly involved. And what does it mean in terms of what is being discussed? I think it's very clear that I'll take a direct quote. Africa wants to go green. Vera, that's what you said, and I think everybody else said it in different ways. The same thing, that basically the time for preaching is over. And it's time to see how we can work together to make things happen. Africans don't need to be convinced about circular economy. They are on board. And the question is that what can we do together to contribute? I guess I have some pictures here. Where are they?
The green button. The button.
It's not his presentation.
Sorry.
Yep. So from my point of view, a few additional points. The first one is this company. One more company to be introduced today, so that when they said that after this event, all this is, these people are going to be available, I would like to introduce. Where is my David Auerbach of Synergy, one of the co-founders of this company that sort of collects waste, human waste from dry toilets, thousands and thousands of them in Nairobi, and converts that into organic fertilizer, and then also insect-based. Basically, they grow bugs. They grow insects in the human waste, and then those get dried and converted into animal protein to be used for chicken feed. He has a bag of that, so if you want to be very brave today, you can taste it, and it doesn't kill you. So this is just an example. Yes, yes. And David is available also afterwards. Our investee company. So another example of what I think we heard already from the panel, which is about this issue of there being huge opportunities, great opportunities. You said that the waste is just a wasted resource. Opportunities in this circular economy space. Opportunities, and the question really is that how can we work together and how can we bring different sort of inputs to play on this? Whether it is financing, resources, that's where FinFund as a Finnish Development Finance institution is. Or whether it's sort of technologies coming from all over the place. We in Finland, we are proud of that. We are an engineering country. We probably train more engineers per capita than any other country on earth, much more than Germans even. And so that whenever there is a problem, the chances are that there has been a Finnish engineer who has been thinking about the solution. And some of those solutions actually work in different contexts. And as you said, some of these opportunities that exist are very specific to African conditions. Others, you need the contextualization, as you said, and others are something that you can just go and copy, depending on the situation. I thought I know quite many of these and quite well most of these Finnish cleantech companies, but it's not true. Just today, I met there one in the lobby, Betolar, another new company, 2-year-old company that has developed solutions for energy efficient construction materials. Substituting cement with a more environmentally friendly alternative, which is basically repurposing waste streams to something that can substitute for cement. And there are many of these, and that's the result when you are training almost quarter of our young people in engineering. So the question is finding ways to put these various things together. Not that Finns go to start teaching Africans what to do, but it is that what are the things that we could contribute, and what are the things that might be needed there. A couple of more slides. One area which again was mentioned, I think, by the panel, is the entire sector of forestry. This is FinFund's investee company, Miro Forestry, this time in West Africa, but we have others in East Africa. Forestry is an important sector an important part, I would say, of the circular economy, renewable resource rather than something that gets depleted if you do it right. Roughly when I was born, there were 1.5 billion cubes of wood in Finnish forests. Since then, we have used something like 3 billion cubes. So how much is left? 2.5. So 1 minus 1.5 was, and now there are 2.5, and 3 billion has been used. So we have succeeded to make it sustainable. Yes, it could be done better. We ourselves are saying that there is too little protected in the southern part of Finland. Most of the protected areas is in the northern part. And yes, we are going to do more of it, and we need to do more of it. But compared to how forests have been destroyed in so many other countries, this is really something to learn from and to utilize from. That in places where basically natural forests are gone. It's not that these sort of tree farms are the havens and biodiversity. They are not. But the point is that when you are producing intensively in relatively small areas of land trees, then you can reduce the pressure on natural forest, which is actually what we are doing in Rwanda, where there is this tiny very narrow strip of, in a way, buffer zone forest, commercial forestry around Nyungwe National Forest, which is sort of commercial forestry as a buffer zone to protect the biodiversity in the Nyungwe, and we are involved in that as well. Another opportunity is renewable energy, and let me tell you something about this opportunity. These windmills in Kenya, we have some engineers, so we can talk technical language. Capacity factor is more than 50%. So the average production is more than 50% of the maximum capacity. Do we have in Finland windmills like that? No, we don't. We are happy with 25% or 30%, sometimes 20%. In Germany, I think they are happy with 15% or certainly much less. So when you are in the natural wind tunnel between two sets of mountains, wind is really the best game in town. Likewise for solar. We are those who are advocating solar in Finland are saying that yes, we are having as much solar radiation in Finland than in Germany. Yes, that's true, but Germany is pretty bad as well. And when you go to Africa, you get twice as much. So you easily in actually many areas, whether it's renewable energy or energy efficiency, you get twice as much kilowatts hours, twice as much power per your investment. And then when what you are competing with, what you are substituting for, in Finland it's something rather well managed, modern, well run fossil things, whereas in much of the much poorer world, you are talking about something probably much more old-fashioned or not as well maintained, so that the chances are that every kilowatt hour that you produce actually cuts twice as much greenhouse gas emissions in Africa than in Finland. So if you get 2 times as much kilowatt hours per your windmill or your solar panel, and 2 times as much emission reductions per kilowatt hour, that's 4 times as much environmental bang for the buck. If you do it not in Finland, but somewhere where the needs are much bigger, and that's what I mean. These opportunities, yes, they are environmental opportunities. They are also commercial opportunities. Thanks to those ratios, these can be profitable investments, and we can really have business opportunities there. And I would very much also encourage the Finnish business people here to join us or to go without us, whatever, but basically to go and see the opportunities and do your contribution also in Africa. There are huge opportunities in circular economy in Africa with African partners and in this space. So I think the future is bright and we can work together.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Jaco.
Thanks.
Thank you all for staying. I hope you would have found the panel informative, interesting. I'm delighted that we have been not countercultural. We have inverted all the stereotypes. An all-Africa panel talking about Africa. African ministers who finished before Finnish delegates. 2 minutes 20 over there. I think we have rewritten all the rules today about how panels work. Thank you for staying to the end. Please remember that our panelists are here in a room outside, prepared to discuss with you further. Enjoy the rest of your summit. Remember that Africa is in the circular economy game, so involve us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.